put relevance in the toolbox. So I'd like to start by telling a little story that I think gives us a good indication of what relevance is. I'm going to pick on my husband here, but when we were first dating, he lived in Seattle and I was going to veterinary school at the University of Illinois. So I would fly out and we'd go do things. One of the first times I flew out, he said, "Okay, I'm going to take you skiing." He knew that that was something special for me because when I played basketball, my coach had a lot of rules of things not to do. Basically, it was don't have any fun because you could get hurt. Skiing was definitely on that list. So I was really excited. We went to the slopes and he decided he was going to teach me how to ski. And I thought, sure, why not? You know what you're doing. So I remember going out there and he said, "Okay, Sarah, you're an athlete, so you'll be a natural. I know you will. This is how you turn, this is how you stop, and let's go on the bunny slope quick." Awesome, you did great. He spent about 5 minutes teaching me how to ski. Then he said, "Well, I think you're ready for the ski lift." And I thought, why not? Clearly I'm a natural. Well, anyway, we got on the ski lift. And as we were going up, I saw something to my left that made me feel a little bit nervous. And I saw 2 black diamonds. And I think I remembered something that black diamond meant that you were really advanced. And I thought, I'm not quite sure I'm ready for that. And as we approached the point where we were going to get off the ski lift, I really started to get nervous. I started breathing rather heavy, sweating, because it was clear I need to know how to ski to get off that ski lift. We approached and it was completely futile. I stood up, rolled down the ski lift, and all they could do was direct traffic around me for the next 5 minutes while I struggled to stand up. Woman down, go this way. I was humiliated. But I thought, I'll get up and try. I'll try again. It'll be okay. So we go to the top of the slope and it was icy and it was steep and it was awful. Zoom crash, all the way down. I was so bruised by the end of it that all I could do to make the way down the rest of the slope was crawl on my bottom, and I'll admit, I was crying. And I wasn't exactly the happiest with my boyfriend at the time. Needless to say, that wasn't a good learning experience. So you can imagine how I felt when I was asked to give a talk at Pig Ski in Boulder, Colorado. I almost didn't accept because just thinking about it made me remember that bad learning experience, and I would start to get flustered and I'd say, I'm just not going to do it. But I thought, maybe I could go and get some real instruction. So I finally said, I'll go. And when I got there, I signed up for a lesson. And as the lesson approached, my anxiety increased and I almost didn't even show up. But I managed to get the equipment and walked over there. And the instructor came up to me and she could tell that I was very nervous. And she said, "So, what's your name? And what was your past experience with skiing?" And I said, "Well, my husband." And she said, "Oh, you're in that group over there." And it was a group of, well, I'll admit, it was mainly a group of ladies whose significant others had tried to teach them how to ski. We'd all had shared experiences and we immediately bonded, each sharing our own personal horror stories. We created a team, and our instructor took us over to the bunny slopes and gradually showed us each different skill. We stayed on those slopes for 1-2 hours. And then she said, I think we're ready. I think we're ready to move up to a green slope, but let's stay together just in case any of us have trouble. So we moved up to the green slope and it was softly snowing. And as we made our way down the hill, I was so grateful that we'd tried again. So after my lesson, I approached her because I was intrigued. And I said, "So why did you use that approach where you spent the first half hour of our lesson talking?" And she said, "Well, Sarah, 80% of first-time skiers never come back. They either have a bad experience or a bad instructor, or they're just pushed beyond their level before they're ready. we know that we have to find out what those previous experiences were if we're ever going to have hope of correcting that and offering that learner a good experience. It clicked for me then. And it may be clicking for some of you now, right? Because sometimes in the ag industry, we don't do that, do we? We tend to throw people on black diamonds and expect them to enjoy the experience and come back. And we wonder why our turnover is so high. Maybe we should be learning from that ski instructor who knew that to correct that 80% of skiers never come back, to correct that statistic, she first had to establish relevance. So let's review what she did to establish relevance. First, she learned what the learner's past experiences were. And then she thought and applied, how does this affect how I teach this learner based upon their past experiences? And if you're going to establish relevance with your learners on farm, those are the two questions that you need to figure out. You need to spend the time with the employee and understand where they're coming from. There's a quote from The Hobbit that talks about Bilbo Baggins and how he's feeling when he's thinking about solving a particular problem. It goes like this. He had a feeling that the answer was quite different and that he ought to know it, but he could not think of it. He began to get frightened, and that is bad for thinking. When we consider adult learners and relevance and their past, we have to take into account how they feel about learning. Does learning make them feel angry or anxious or depressed or embarrassed? Does testing make them feel this way? Are we providing a learning environment in which they feel safe so that these emotions that they might be having don't affect their ability to learn? So why do these emotions take away our ability to learn? It's called fight or flight. When we're deep into these emotions, we can't think. We're relying on our instinct to get us away from the predator. Whereas if we're in a safe environment, an environment where we are calm, where we don't feel embarrassed, where we feel confident, we're more likely to succeed. We're more likely to learn. In fact, that's the only place we learn. So let's go through a few examples of how we, as on-farm teachers, are going to start by establishing relevance. On farm, you have to ask questions. You have to listen, and you have to survey your new employees. You have to schedule feedback and follow-up. But one thing you can do is also provide them a similar experience through which they all have a similar plane of relevance on which they're starting. We often do that through e-learning experiences. This relevance can be created by finding this experience that the learners have in common. So in our e-learning, we might establish it in a barn. We might set up a 3D barn that looks very much like theirs, so that in their mind it's like, that's relevant, that's where I work. Also in e-learning strategy, we might create it with a new experience. Now, why do we do that? What happens when you travel? Your brain, when you enter into the new environment, starts to secrete a chemical that's called an endorphin. Endorphins help create new neuron linkages in your brain that help you learn. So if you shock the brain into a new experience, as you see here, here's two folks flying in a plane to a farm, your brain starts to secrete endorphins. So one e-learning strategy is to make it engaging and exciting and stimulate a new environment so that learner secretes endorphins so they are better able to learn. One thing that's important about e-learning is that it must be task-orientated, because if not, it's not relevant to our on-farm learners. These learners must understand that it has immediate application to the tasks at hand. And what's best is when they finish the e-learning is that it's combined with on-farm verification that the manager signs off on to have that personal experience. And at the end of the day, if that manager has been taught how to teach adults, he'll do one more thing called engagement, which we'll learn about in our next section.